For 29 years, the town believed Sister Clara had vanished into the fog and that the convent had kept its secrets under lock and prayer. I am Sister Clara. I am 81 years old, and I am the one who will tell you why we disappeared and why the silence lasted so long. What I will reveal is not merely about shaken faith. It is about how authority wrapped itself in habit and stole childhoods and voices. If you are listening now, please write "I believe" in the comments and help this secret find air. I will begin at the beginning because the truth lives in dates and small moments and in the pages I kept hidden in the attic box marked memories. The convent sat on a bluff above the river, a squat building of lime-washed stone with a bell that cracked the dawn. I remember the smell of boiled cabbage in the refectory, the grit of ash in the hearth, the soft wool of the habit rubbed thin on my shoulders, and the cold metal of the rosary against my palm. The routine felt safe and sacred until the safety shifted into something darker. I was 16 when I entered the convent in 1958, a girl from a village 3 valleys away, hungry for order and for a place to belong. My backstory begins with a house that had more love than food, with a father who drank steadily and a mother who stitched late into the nights and taught me 3 prayers and a quiet way of holding shame. I learned to keep my voice small because it kept the house whole, and I thought perhaps the convent would offer a different kind of peace. The first paragraph of my life in the convent was work and rhythm and the daily liturgy. The next paragraph is the one I did not expect. My childhood had already taught me to fold sorrow into service, but it did not teach me how authority could be levered into menace. I loved to read and to work the garden, and I took comfort in the labors and the sisters' names and faces. Sister Rosa taught me to mend habits with slow, careful stitches. Brother Tomas, the layman who tended the boilers, would whistle while he stoked the furnace. Mother Agnes, the superior, had a voice like a bell and a list of rules she kept memorized. Miss Elena, the seamstress from the village, dropped off bundles and hummed. I will tell you each name because hiding names is how silence grows. So I name them now so the secret has witnesses, even if only in my telling. The antagonist in this story arrived like a tide. Father Mateo was a man of the cloth who had a reputation for eloquence and for fundraising. He arrived in 1963 with a cassock perfectly pressed and a smile that found the weakest places. His backstory deserves its own telling. He had been trained in a city seminary, had family money, and patrons who admired him. He was a man who cultivated confidences and gave the town sermons that left people teary but obedient. He volunteered for children programs, he taught catechism, and he organized processions, and he made it clear the church sheltered those who followed him faithfully. I will tell you now that the learning of his cruelty took time and obstinacy, and that his abuse was wrapped in ritual and in silence. He was methodical and calculated, always careful to leave no open proof, and always ready with a benediction after an unsettling touch. The pattern emerged gradually. At first, a glance, a hand that stayed a second too long, then an invitation to meet him after Vespers to go over a passage from Scripture. I remember the first night I noticed the change. The chapel was lit by a single candle, and his shadow seemed to linger longer than the others. He said quietly, "Your devotion is rare," and he took my hand. I remember my breath hitching, the cool of stone floors, the scent of wax, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. I told myself it was a misstep. I told myself I had misread the world. I confided quietly to Sister Rosa, "Something is wrong." She touched my arm and said, "Be careful, Clara." And later she whispered, "You are not alone." And that whisper meant more refuge than any sermon. The arrival of Father Mateo shifted how we were allowed to be alone. And when complaints came to Mother Agnes, they were met with a certain practical coldness. We tried to tell. We wrote notes and slipped them under doors. We left messages in the laundry baskets. We tried to tell another priest. The institution closed like a fist. The first formal report went to the bishop and returned sealed. I remember the box of letters I kept under the floorboard, the ledger where I wrote dates and names, the coffee-stained page with a sketch of a hand. Evidence in our possession included a small notebook, a torn hymn book, letters folded into the seams of linens, and a black and white photograph of Father Mateo with a child at a picnic. These documents I kept hidden in my attic box for decades. The moment the first small fight for truth began, I learned about betrayal. Sister Rosa warned me once when she saw me writing. "You are burying your heart in paper," she said. But she also helped me by sliding me a spare envelope and the address of a woman in the city who had once worked with victims. The network of help was small, but it existed. I will tell you the names because they were real and because we owe them our lives. Detective Harper, a young policeman from the next county, read my notes and hesitated before promising to look into the photograph. Attorney Morales, a lawyer, the city told me in a quiet lunchroom that law is slow and can be weaponized, but he would keep the files safe. Nurse Linda at the county clinic gave me medicine and shelter. Brother Tomas, who had kept the boiler steady, smuggled us bread on nights we left. Miss Elena sewed false pockets into our habits and kept watch outside the garden. Father Ramon, a priest in a neighboring parish, listened and then delivered a letter to a sympathetic Monsignor. I named these 8 people because they acted, and because without them our escape would have been impossible. The escalation of abuse and the failure of the institution to act created a choice. We could keep living inside the secrecy and become further broken, or we could try to leave and expose everything, risking retribution and scandal. The decision was made across nights of whispering and candlelight meetings in the laundry room. We mapped a plan using the back stairwell, the old orchard fence, the route past the mill, and the small boat tied under the willow. We collected small proofs, the photo, the ledger entries in a low hand, pages of a diary where a girl named Maria had written, "I am afraid at night," and a copy of a donor book with Father Mateo listed as contributor to a fund for orphans. Each piece of evidence mattered because it gave our story edges, a way to be believed. We rehearsed our departure. Dialogue became constant in those days. Clara asked quietly, "Are you ready?" Sister Rosa answered, "I cannot stay here another night." Sister Rosa said, "What if they follow us?" Brother Tomas said, "There is a patrol only on Sundays." Miss Elena said, "I can hide you in my cart." Detective Harper said, "I will meet you at the bridge at midnight." Attorney Morales said, "I will take the documents to the paper to keep them safe." Nurse Linda said, "Take this, it will help the pain." And Father Ramon said, "You must name it to free yourself." We practiced until the schedules matched, until the bell tower and moonlight aligned with our plan. The night of the escape was full of small sensory moments that remain indelible. The air was cold and tasted faintly of river mud. The bell had stopped ringing, and the wind felt like a hand pushing us forward. The wool of my habits soaked with dew, my feet slipped on moss, my fingers smelled of sap and old rope, and my mouth tasted of fear and iron. There were footsteps behind us and the scrape of boots on stone. I remember a pocket knife warm in my palm and the texture of the ropes we used to climb over the garden wall. The dialogue that night was taut and long, and it was the heart of our action. Clara whispered, "Where are we going?" Sister Rosa replied, "We go to the river." Clara asked, "Are you sure?" Sister Rosa said, "It is." "Now or never," Detective Harper muttered. "Keep low," Attorney Morales said. "Hold the papers tight," Miss Elena said. "Do not look back," Brother Tomas said. "Wait for the boat," Nurse Linda said. "Keep breathing," Father Ramon said. "Pray quietly." I prayed with my lips moving fast and silently, my heart a drum. The boat leaked slightly, and the sound of oars was small and precise. And at one point we heard a voice call, "Sister Clara, stop," and we held our breath until the echo trailed off. Our first refuge was in a small boarding house in the city on Harrow Street. where Elena knew a landlady who took pity. I changed my name at the time. We created identities and found work in laundries and kitchens, and we taught ourselves how to be invisible. The early years were consumed by small rituals of survival. I washed at dawn, the soap stinging my hands, and I learned to hold my eyes level and to memorize the faces of neighbors. The sensory detail of city life became the new background for our reinvention. The smell of soot from tenements, the grit of coal dust on windowsills, the taste of cheap coffee, the sound of children playing in alleys, the soft creak of the boarding house stairs, and the pattern of light through the dusty curtains. We found allies who gave more than shelter. Attorney Morales stored the documents in a safe deposit box, and Detective Harper kept a copy of the photograph in his desk. Nurse Linda taught me to breathe through panic attacks, and Father Ramon offered spiritual counsel and small acts of mercy. Years passed, and the shadow of loss grew. Several sisters died quietly, one by one, of illnesses or accidents, or simply vanished into other places. Sister Rosa, who had been my closest friend, contracted tuberculosis and died in 1971 on a rainy March morning. I remember the wet scent of peat in the graveyard, the stiffness of her hands, and the silence that fell over our small circle. The grief hardened into a kind of guilt because I had left, and yet I kept the ledger that documented the abuse, and I had letters that might have helped if only they had reached the right desk at the right time. The decades that followed were the slow work of rebuilding with the constant companion of memory and remorse. I remarried twice briefly under assumed names to ensure survival, and then left both marriages quietly when secrecy became dangerous. I worked in kitchens and factories, on docks as a seamstress, and later I taught at a community center where I ran a group for women survivors of abuse. I never stopped collecting evidence. I hid the ledger in a Bible I donated to a church archive, and I entrusted the photograph to a journalist who had once promised he would keep it safe. The long passage of time brought changes that surprised me. Public opinion shifted slowly, and institutions that had once been impermeable began to leak. The pattern of denial no longer held entirely as more survivors came forward. There were losses along the way. Brother Tomas died in a coal mine collapse in 1978, and Miss Elena passed away in 1985 after a brief illness. Each death carved open old wounds, yet also propelled me forward. In 1997, a new generation of journalists began to work with investigative techniques that I had only dreamed of. I reached out to one of them, Anna Klein, a reporter who owed me nothing, and who took a lunch at a diner and listened to me read entries from my notebook. Anna read, and then she said, "We need more than this. We need verification," and I gave her more. We worked together for months. The process of gathering evidence and of institutional accounting required a chain of custody and careful procedural steps. The forensic description I will give is not technical jargon, but it is a necessary explanation. Evidence handling required photographs with scale notes, dated and logged. Each item was placed in numbered tamper-evident bags, a digital copy was made and time-stamped, and witnesses initialed a chain of custody form. Medical records had to be subpoenaed and redacted properly, then reviewed by an independent forensic examiner who documented scars and injuries against reported accounts. A separate procedural description followed for interviews. Witnesses were interviewed in private rooms with recorded statements preserved in both audio and transcript, and an independent advocate present to ensure consent and to prevent re-traumatization. These processes are slow and meticulous, and they are designed to make a story admissible in court and credible in public records. The return to the public eye began because of Anna and because Detective Harper had not forgotten us. He finally used his authority to open a file and spoke with Bishop Hernandez, who had recently taken office and who had a different tolerance for scandal. The meeting with Bishop Hernandez was a pivot scene. He asked gently, "Tell me, what do you want, Clara?" "I want truth," I said, and he answered, "We will start an inquiry." The inquiry became a public investigation in which testimonies were recorded and old ledgers were cross-referenced with donor records, and the photograph retrieved from a newspaper archive was authenticated. The Church launched an internal canonical process, while in parallel, the civil authorities examined criminal allegations. Both processes moved at different speeds and with different priorities. The canonical review focused on moral culpability and possible removal from clerical duties, while the civil case needed corroboration and witnesses beyond a reasonable doubt. We faced disbelief in the community. Some neighbors defended the convent, some said, "We do not want scandal," and believed that reputations were more important than truth. Others came forward slowly with their own stories, and the network of survivors grew. The moment of confrontation with Father Mateo was arranged in a small hearing room. There I felt the full weight of our years. The tension in those days was not only legal, it was visceral. Two separate moments of palpable tension occurred that I will describe in detail. The first lasted the length of a single meeting and was the quiet before a verdict, in which Father Mateo sat with a face ashen and the attorneys moved papers like cards. I sat with my hand clenched, holding the ledger, and I could feel the room contract like the chest of someone holding their breath. Paper rustled softly, the coffee cup clicked, a pen rolled, and the sound of Father Mateo clearing his throat seemed loud as thunder. I thought of the girls we had been, of the way the habit smelled of smoke and river mud, and I wondered if 30 years of hiding would be undone by a slip of memory. The second moment came when the hearing officer read out the initial ruling, which required temporary suspension and a canonical hearing. There was an audible intake of breath in the room. Some murmured in relief, others hissed in protest. Father Mateo rose and his jaw tightened. The officers conferred quietly, and a bailiff stood by the door as if the room might split. Those two moments were short in time, but extended in consequence, like the distance between a stone thrown and its ripple across the water. The legal procedures included a description of evidence, authentication, that I will summarize here in accessible terms because many people asked how we turned a notebook and a photograph into a public obligation. The evidentiary process required third-party verification of dates, handwriting comparison by a forensic document examiner, a forensic photo analyst to confirm the origin, and an independent archivist to trace donation records. Statements were cross-checked with hospital intake forms and school logs. Each page was cataloged and copies saved on secure servers. Chain of custody forms were filed with signatures and notarization to show the documents had not been altered. Those steps are boring to the heart, but essential to justice. The fall of Father Mateo arrived in stages. He was first suspended, his name removed from the donor book. In public statements, there was an apology that rang thin, and then a formal canonical trial that recommended laicization. The civil process was slower, but it culminated in a suit that led to a settlement for some survivors and to public censure. The town's reactions were mixed. Some refused to believe the accusations and organized demonstrations demanding forgiveness. Others wept openly and attended memorials for the girls who had suffered. I sat through hearings and felt everything old and new all at once, the hurt and the relief like a double helix. The epilogue of this story is not tidy, despite how much we wish for tidy endings. I will give you a timeline of the first month, 3 months, and 6 months following the public reckoning because I know people need to see. Incremental action, and because small timelines make a legacy feel practicable. 1 month after the hearing, a support center was established in a donated parish hall. It opened with a single counselor, 2 volunteers, and a list of phone numbers for legal aid. The room smelled of stale coffee and new paint, the chairs set in a circle, and a banner that read, "You are believed," taped to the wall. We served 32 survivors in that first month, provided emergency counseling, and raised a small fund through grassroots donations. 3 months after the exposure, the support center expanded into a formal nonprofit named the Convent Project, with a board that included Nurse Linda, Detective Harper, Attorney Morales, and a survivor representative. By the 3-month mark, we had a hotline operational, referrals to pro bono lawyers, and a public archive where documents could be submitted. The city agreed to digitize certain records, and the press published a series of investigative pieces that prompted new inquiries in 2 other dioceses. The smell of dry paper in the archive and the hum of scanning machines became the new ordinary of accountability. 6 months after the initial hearing, the project had a small staff, a legal clinic, and an outreach program visiting rural parishes to educate about signs of abuse. The convent itself had undergone internal reform, the superior was replaced, and there were workshops for clergy about boundaries and ethics instituted by the diocese. The legacy of those 6 months was measurable. 5 formal complaints had led to reviews in neighboring towns, and a seed fund had been created to support survivors seeking relocation and therapy. That is not enough, of course, but it is progress, and both the law and the church had been nudged in ways they could not ignore. Throughout this narrative, I have returned to the words that hold our meaning: secret, silence, convent, priest, report, escape, testimony, justice, remorse, network, investigation, evidence, survivor, redemption, memory. These words have kept me going, and they should keep us vigilant. The conclusion of my telling is a combination of reckoning and gentle instruction. We lost many things, and we gained a fragile truth. The institution removed the man from ministry, an internal canonical process was opened, and some institutional policies were changed. A support center now stands and has helped hundreds, offering counseling, legal assistance, and emergency housing. We started a small archive that has preserved documents for scholars and advocates, and we launched an outreach program that trained 200 clergy and lay volunteers in recognizing abuse and in safe reporting protocols. There's a lesson in this story about faith and accountability. Faith is not a permission for silence. Faith demands justice when it is betrayed. My final ask is simple. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel to support investigations that uncover systemic abuse, and leave a comment telling us which part surprised you the most. If you can write, I believe you. You will. Give courage to others who still live in fear. Remember that silence protects the powerful and speech protects the vulnerable. My last line is a plea and a promise. Speak the truth, however long it has been kept, because memory kept in the dark does not heal when it is alone.